Hi, everybody.
What's up?
Giving a presentation. So this is class analysis in the U.S. and our strategy for evolution. Like Greg said, a lot of it is taken from an FRSO document of the same name. A lot of it I've kind of paraphrased and turned into this very eye-catching and snazzy presentation that I'll be using to help kind of guide me and keep your attention through what hopefully will be a pretty quick and painless presentation. So first off, let's start. Oh, I hate you. First, let's talk about class analysis. So I'm a sociology major, and this question gets asked like every single time I take a class about inequality or like economics in the U.S. Blah blah blah. It's like, what would you consider the class character of the United States to be? Like, if you had to separate the U.S. into classes, what would you say the classes are? Is there 3? Is there 10? Is there 7? Is there 2.5? If you're like being picky, how big would you say they are? How would you define them? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Upper, middle, lower.
Not bad, not bad. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Anybody who's there's people here wearing FRSO shirts, so I'm guessing they want to. There's people hugging. That's not an answer.
If you listen to mainstream media and mainstream academia, they would just say there's the rich, the middle class, and the poor.
Yeah, and that's kind of the fun mainstream answer.
That's simplistic, nonsensical idea.
So here's another fun one. Like, what class would you maybe say you were? Okay, so this isn't such a good question because this is Revolutionary Students Union, and everybody's going to be like, we're working class. But
not me. I'm a labor aristocrat.
Greg's a labor aristocrat. That's awesome because I totally make fun of you in the labor aristocrat panel. So I'm glad you already said that. Makes me feel like less of an asshole. But yeah, and it's funny. There's a lot of different answers to this, right? And so Marxists, of course, would say that classes are defined by somebody or a group's relation to the means of productions, right? Like if they own it, if they work for it, what level they own, how much of it, et cetera, et cetera. And so that brings us to our first, the monopoly capitalists, which, these are the dreaded, 1%ers, those people we always hear about, kind of what the Occupy movement was struggling against, but I would say a lot of us obviously struggle against. These are the people who own just massive amounts of means of production. Common names like the Rockefellers, the Waltons, people who own not just like big businesses, but like super huge businesses and have so much goddamn money, like they're hemorrhaging money that they can just dump it into lobbies. They can back congressmen. They can start a goddamn war because they want to take over a country and put a factory there, right? They want to crush labor movements. They can do it. These are the people that, we talk about when we talk about the rich or the capitalists usually. Kind of explains it. Following right up behind that, the non-monopoly capitalists. And so this one's a bit more tricky. These are your, I was having a hard time thinking of a Utah example of this. Maybe the Huntsmans, if you guys are familiar. They own all these hospitals. I don't even know how they got rich. I just know they back things with grotesque amounts of money. And so they're not quite monopoly capitalists. I don't think the Huntsmans have backed a coup in South America or tried to push, maybe locally in Utah. Actually, I'm sure locally in Utah, the Huntsmans control all kinds of different senators and bills and what have you, right? They can throw their weight around. But they're not quite as big. They're not the main issue with capitalism in America. And an important note, and this is kind of an interesting note that, yes, Chris?
If you guys saw, maybe I posted this, CNN just did a report on by each state, the wealthiest individuals in that state, which is kind of what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
It's just based on their income, right? The question is how they got their income.
Right, exactly. So these non-monopoly capitalists, a great way to think of it, are they're insanely wealthy, but they're not wealthy in the way that some of these old money like institutions have been around for a long time that allow people to have all these connections and all of this money and all of this different political clout that they can affect policy on like these fundamental levels, right? And an important note, and I think this is pretty interesting, is that like in rare cases, right? And so some of these people, like if they're very wealthy, like I think this still holds true. I don't actually know. Oprah is one of the 400 most wealthy people in America. That's anybody going to call me out on that? Okay. And you know, as an African American woman, as like a woman of color, obviously her interests would be kind of different from the other 399 rich white dudes that are on that list, right? And so in some very rare instances, say in Oprah's case, there might be struggles that she would be interested in promoting, you know, promoting women of color, promoting different struggles. I mean, I don't know if she's released anything about like this whole police brutality nonsense. I doubt she has. Yeah,
Women's rights.
Right, I really doubt it. But it makes a case that in very rare instances, sometimes these non-monopoly capitalists can actually be useful for a struggle, either as figureheads or as allies, sometimes financially. But I mean, we're not going to count on them, right? Nobody. Yeah.
It seems like a really common one is like no to Walmart campaigns. So if there's like
Yeah.
a regional like supermarket,
Mhm.
you know, that are still like screwing their workers, you know, still making a ridiculous amount of money, right? But they'll push things like no Walmart campaigns because they don't want to compete with, well, monopoly capitalists.
And that's kind of what's funny about it, is it's this really bittersweet thing. It's not that they're doing it out of the like goods of their hearts, that they want to fight capitalism, they want to fight Sam Walton. It's like, no, I want to be you. I want to take over your shit. So I'm gonna like throw sand in your face as much as you can. I don't know. That's kind of why I think it's a funny note, and I bring it up here. I feel like it's important to note, but when I read it at least, I get kind of this like, yeah, I'm still not gonna call him. Like, anywho, so now we get into kind of a more fun part. The petty bourgeoisie. Anybody else ever have to say bourgeoisie in their head when they spell it? Otherwise I can't spell it unless I do that. So the petty bourgeoisie, I've broken down into kind of, and the article does this as well, like upper, middle, and lower segments. And this upper crust, I don't know why I said that. The upper crust of the petty bourgeoisie are these salaried professionals, doctors, lawyers, the people that live up behind Capitol Hill. I don't know if any of you guys ever drive around back there. There's like gated communities, and these houses are like bigger than my neighborhood. Yeah, right. And like they have just like sections of mountain that they own, and with like deer and land, and it's weird. I've been to some of these houses and they make me sick. Administrators, college professionals, and this is kind of funny, right? They kind of consider themselves middle class, because it's not like they're these huge business owners. They're not raking in millions and millions and billions, right? They don't control regional chains of restaurants or anything like that. They're just like really well-paid doctors, lawyers, and other professionals. So they still think like, yeah, I have to work for my money. And in like a lot of cases, they're not directly exploiting workers for their money, right? They're not actually capitalists in like a strict sense. But obviously they don't share any economic concerns with people like us, or even like really well-paid people, or labor aristocrats like Greg, for instance. They're more so the motherfuckers who watch Fox News, not satirically. They like to think they're working hard for their money, but even though they're like super wealthy, ridiculous people, their politics are very backward. They're not the kind of people either that we're going to call. Whereas sometimes unless they're college professors, I know we've brought in quite a few of those to give really great talks. Following shortly behind them are the middle layer. I really hate that I didn't edit this before I presented it. This was just me typing it out last night in a sleepy delirium. The middle layer of the petite bourgeoisie, they're kind of like their upper crust counterparts, right? Like a lot of them are doctors or lawyers, or like business type professionals, but they don't make as much money. They're not as successful. They're not the guys that are living up behind Capitol Hill, right, with all this land and like 5 cars. But they're doing pretty well with themselves. They probably still have a big house, pretty well off to do, but not really upwardly mobile. They're not, the top of their field. They're just well off. Still, their class interest doesn't lie with the working class whatsoever. They're not trying to overthrow capital. They're still trying to kind of get more money, advance themselves further and further, trying to become part of this upper strata, just unsuccessfully. Who fucking who? And kind of like their upper crust counterparts, some of them kind of have, or I guess I should say, unlike their upper crust counterparts, some of them might actually have different kind of political or class interests, right? Some of these, probably more of your hippie liberal arts professors are going to be around here, right? A lot of them that are at least willing to talk about Marx and be critical of, police brutality, stuff like that. Some of them are good people, not usually. And then the bottom of the petite bourgeoisie tend to be the most progressive, and many of them are kind of indistinguishable from the working class economically. And I feel like that's an important note, and that some of these, maybe adjunct professors would be a great example, right? That they work in an academic field and they're not exactly like a trade unionist or anything, but they're not making a lot of money. A lot of them are still just barely getting by. They're having to scrape together. I know quite a few adjuncts, right, that have to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, scrimp and save to get by, and they're desperately trying to make something out of their career, but just are unsuccessful. Other great examples are people who own small construction companies. There's some of these people, I'm sure, in all of our families. We all have an uncle that owns I have an uncle that owns an Alpha Graphics. That's weird. He employs 5, 6 people. That's about it. Not really a capitalist, not exactly a crazy successful businessman. But they're the type of people that are their own boss, or have the power to hire and fire people. Ariel.
Would you say that in the transportation industry, maybe this includes the owner-operators of...
I would say that because it's directly in the text there, and I'm sure you just read that. Owners and operators of semi-trucks, right? These are people that own kind of their own business. It's nothing grand, nothing luxurious, and they're not super well paid for it, but, they own their own business. They do employ people. They do have some kind of economic power, even though they're not, I guess, in a wealth or salary sense. I
just wanted to add, sometimes they're just solely themselves, or them and their wife,
Mm-hmm.
or their spouse, I should say.
Right.
But sometimes they do have employees,
Mm-hmm.
Drivers, people feeding them, but I've met many of them that are just them, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of more mom and pop shop type stuff, right? It's we're trying really hard to make this neighborhood business work, and it's, sink or swim. It's a recession, right? What?
I'm not a sociology major like you. I'm a Jordan's actually let me know.
You say that like it's to my credit or something,
yeah,
but
that's good. But what I've observed is that when you have people in that group that you're talking about right now, you'll still have a combination of blue collar and white collar. That's where it seems to merge a little bit. And I noticed that the white collar amongst them in that group tend to be more progressive than the blue collar ones, who may be more critical of those who may be struggling, who are in the, let's say, disadvantaged class. Okay.
Well, that's really cool that you brought that up, because a lot of these types of people, and like I said, I'm sure we can all think of examples of these types of people in our own families or just people we know. A lot of them are the types that worked their way up to it, right? Like my uncle, for instance.
Why can't you work your way up?
Yeah, they're I worked my ass off. I got here. I own my little humble slice of some business, whether it's a franchise or it's they're just a manager of a local branch or whatever, right? It's I worked my ass off and I'm here, and now I'm managing to carve something out for myself. So I'm gonna fight tooth and nail to keep it. Where, a lot of these white collar people, sometimes it's just simple corporate advancement. Like they didn't get very far, but they have something, right? And so it's not having to fight and scrape.
I mean, and wouldn't you also agree that the people this class, kind of lump themselves in with the sort of business entrepreneurs, the people of the very highest class. And even though they identify with that, in all actuality, I mean, they make struggles to make ends meet just as much as everybody else. And so when there's ever an argument for like, oh, small business in Utah or something like that, right? It's always talking about insurance costs of these people that can't even cover their own insurance for them and like their 2 employees because they're not one of the big dogs, but then they make it seem as if, they seem to side always with, the large bourgeois, as it were. When in actuality, right, even though they have the exploitative practices in terms of, labor.
Yeah, no, of course.
But they're always sort of like, they always seem to be ideologically pushing for the rights to make, of course, the big bourgeoisie bigger.
Yeah, and it's an important trend to notice. There's a couple things in there that I really like, but it's kind of an important trend to notice that like as we kind of come down this chain, like from the monopoly capitalist down to maybe the working class, like between the capitalists and the petite bourgeois, like a lot of them get more exploitative actually as they go down in an effort to try to be competitive, right? Because as we go farther and farther down, these are people that are trying harder and harder to achieve like some semblance of the capitalist dream, right? Whereas working class, it's kind of like we walk in, we do this job, and then we're out. What characterizes a lot of the petit bourgeois, in relation to their relation to the means of production, is that they're not doing any particular material thing, right? A lot of it are they're doctors and lawyers. They have these kind of fancy professional type jobs. So a lot of them consider themselves like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm just part of this class. But it's not so much the case. Whereas some of these doctors are raking in millions, some of these doctors are like, they're from your down like neighborhood clinic, neighborhood pharmacy, whatever, and aren't making that much money.
Yeah, an interesting point to bring up is, say, Walmart truck drivers. You would think it's just Walmart, right? They're a big monopoly corporation that owns their own trucking line and can ship all their stuff from their own factories to their storefronts. But in reality, all their truck drivers are contract truck drivers, which means they're petit bourgeois by definition, by class. They own their own trucks.
Right.
But then they have to front all their own costs, of transportation, of maintenance, changing their own tires, and that sort of thing. So in that sense, yes, they own their own means of production, but it's really not good for them in that sense.
Yeah.
Because they bear a lot of the burden of, again, their enterprise.
And again, kind of what makes this part of the petit bourgeois most interesting is that they're a lot of times indistinguishable from working class people, right? They don't make a lot of money. They have a hard time making ends meet. They don't have a lot of benefits. They're often like contractors trying to, fend for themselves. They just so happen to own like whatever job or business they're doing. And that's like a really critical, but sometimes minor distinction that I think is interesting. Anybody else? There was a lot of good discussion on this one. Anybody else? Okay. And then now we have the working class. The top of the working class is what a lot of people, and Kyle gave a great presentation on this. Hi, Kyle. I loved your presentation on the labor aristocracy. And they tend to be the highest paid, a lot of the most highest skilled and most highly specialized workers, plumbers, electricians, carpenters. When we tend to think of like high paying union jobs, I'm pretty sure this is what we think of. They're also the best looking, and they drink the most. Okay, in certain cases not so much drinking, but but also as a class, they tend to be the most militant when it comes to defending their interests, right?
This is just a funny anecdote.
Always.
I'm standing around at my job, which is a union stagehand job. I'm literally standing around because we were brought back to push things to a truck.
I know how that goes.
Right, and so one of the guys I'm working with just sits there and he's like, yeah, I mean, can you believe there are just people out there busting their nuts, like shoveling concrete right now for $10 an hour? Like, that's literally his attitude, right? It's just like a spontaneous like comment. But it reflects the attitude, right?
Yeah.
We are being paid stupid amounts of money to come and push boxes in.
No, absolutely. And yeah, and a lot of these really high paying union jobs, that's kind of the thing. Like, you're still working class, you still bust your hump, but a lot of times it means you're really well paid for it. And like, it does kind of come with an air of like, well, I have money, you know, at least I'm not starving, you know, like some people tend to be. Another important thing to consider with this top part of the working class, however, is a lot of times, like, and this goes back to like the 50s, right? A lot of more prejudiced like hiring practices, and even in unions, more prejudiced hiring practices have meant that a lot of these people that work their way to the top of these unions are traditionally like white males. You know, not a lot of room for women or oppressed nationalities, and that also tends to make them, in a lot of these working class like struggles, kind of tends to make them really chauvinistic in their organizing methods. It's like, well, we're here at the top and we know what's best, and we're the white dudes, so we're gonna lead it the way we see fit, instead of trying to, I guess, see the struggle from multiple points of view and try to include as many people as possible.
Do you think there's anything to add there in terms of like sort of a national chauvinism in this labor aristocracy, particularly like the whole idea of, you know, for instance, in the United States, there's always a big talk, especially from like the Democrats, to keeping jobs over here
Yeah.
and things like that. Do you think that there's something to comment about that in the labor aristocracy?
Yeah, I suppose I would say when these jobs like do get sent overseas, or I guess that's what you're talking about, is national chauvinism. When these jobs get sent overseas, I would say it more so tends to affect maybe the middle part of the working class, and I know that's like kind of a cop-out distinction to make. Kind of more so affects the middle part of the working class, and so while these guys may be concerned about it, I don't know. Anybody else want to take that one?
You mentioned the, you know, I mean, and specifically if we're talking about like plumbers, electricians, carpenters,
Yeah.
stuff like that, you can send all the factories and all the car factories
Yeah.
you want. But if your house breaks down or your toilet's flooding or you get a house built, it's more inconvenient to say, you know, it's kind of hard to export that. So
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that, like, you know.
Yeah,
I
these
think that might have been
these tend to be not so much factory workers, and I guess that's what I was trying to say before I kind of. These tend to be less so factory workers, and sure, some of them are, but a lot of them tend to be more skilled labor, electricians, plumbers, and therefore less so affected by shipping jobs overseas. And they're more, I don't want to say service-oriented, but
No, I mean, we own a skill set. That's what
yeah, it's more so a skill set than like a being in a place assembling wheels or what have you.
I wonder though if there's a distinction to be made between somebody who's like a doctor and somebody who's like a plumber. Like when you think about it, they both work on things and they don't necessarily manufacture anything to go through the normal capitalistic process. But here in this hierarchy or this taxonomy you've created, or I should say, or illustrating, I should say, it seems to me like there's a division where, say for instance, a doctor is a type of worker who needs to go through a sort of educational process, as would somebody in a union, but they aren't actually productive. So what is the relationship to production and reproduction that divides, like, say, for instance, the skilled labor of a worker and the skilled labor of a doctor or a nurse?
I suppose what I would say, and I think that's a really interesting distinction to bring up. I guess what I would say more is that plumbers are, you know, in essence, fix piping. Electricians fix electrical stuff. Mechanics would fix the cars, the trucks, the what have you, that are directly involved in maintaining these means of production, right? Like a factory needs lights, a factory needs plumbing, a factory needs trucks to go in and out of it. Whereas a doctor is more so, or like a lawyer, more so has to deal with actual human beings themselves. And I would say in some cases, like with lawyers, for instance, these jobs are more so created out of social structures than actual needs for people to get, like food, water, shelter, housing.
So would you say then that the big distinction is then the difference between the static and dynamic means of production?
I suppose so, yeah.
I mean, because like, say for instance, the means of production, right? You need labor in order to make production of all these.
Right, right.
Right? And in that way, one way you can consider them like pipes, but the distinction that's made, like for instance in Dawes Capital, is that there's a difference between the dynamic and the static means of production. But if that's the case, somebody like say for instance, a domestic worker, somebody who raises children, for instance, would then be a part of the petit bourgeois, even though they don't make any money. Just like, for instance, an unsuccessful business, in the sense that they're skilled labor, or in some cases skilled labor, but they don't really actually produce anything. In fact, very little, if any money at all.
Right.
He was before me, and then I'll go.
the only thing I was gonna say about that and way I would view it is that medical professionals, for the most part, they have a very integral role to production, because if you don't have any healthy workers or able-bodied workers, who then will take over your production. So I mean, yeah, overall, I would say that that's one of the main reasons, because if you can't make the gears turn, then if you're sick, then what's the point?
That's a good point. And, oh, did you have your hand up? I didn't.
I have in mind now.
Okay, what I was gonna throw my 2 bits. On this topic, I would say the common denominator on both of these 2 types of professionals that you speak of, doctors, lawyers versus skilled professionals here, is that both of them are licensed contractors. They have to be degreed or credentialed in that they have to serve a certain amount of education and get skilled. But in this case, with this trained or in the trades, the trades industry, they have to do an apprenticeship or some type of thing that doesn't require an intensive type of education as does someone having to go into law school or to get their doctorate. Obviously, that's a big difference. And then they actually see themselves as a higher tier, even though they might actually make the same amounts of money in some cases, because they have that extra university level or higher higher learning type of degree, right? Then they see themselves being higher up in a sense, when it comes to classism, that type of thing. But believe it or not, what I happen to notice, my observation is that if you were to take a doctor, lawyer, which is white collar, versus in the blue collar industry, these are tiered as far as in the trade industry. These guys are more likely to exploit a lower level worker in that a lot of times they actually contract with labor rally groups like that, and they hire people for very, I don't want to say nominal, but petty amounts of money, like $8 an hour or whatever. But, they're not really that high up themselves. They see themselves as doing somebody else a favor. I've been through that before, so that's kind of my take on it.
That seems to me like a quantitative distinction rather than a qualitative one.
Yeah, and
Classism has, within different hierarchies have multi-levels, I mean, even when you talk about, if you're talking about in capitalism, whether it's just earning the amounts of money versus their status on how they see themselves, then you have another tier to deal with, status versus class, because they see themselves as, white collar, they get more education as opposed to going to like junior college and getting a trades degree, or just like some kind of school that they show on TV, that, they don't have to, I mean, they still have to pay for their education.
right, and
I think Chris was
oh,
Yeah, so
Sorry,
the
but-
trade in itself versus its actual role in a social concrete setting. So a doctor who gets a free ride from his parents, is through school and ends up inheriting an entire medical facility, whatever, and just make millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
And is the kind of guy who does operations on like celebrities.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's gonna make a lot more money than your lowest level plumber who's just trying to scrape it to get by,
Right.
out of his own van. Contrary, the medical student who actually has to take out massive amounts of student loans, and is in debt and takes like the midnight shift at some shit hospital in poor sections of neighborhoods, probably not going to be making the same amount of money and have the same types of attitudes and dispositions as the guy who's plumbing like mansions.
Right.
So again, the trades don't necessarily mean anything independent of their actualization in the social process.
Mm-hmm. And it is important to know that some of this stuff is pretty nebulous like that. Like it can kind of.
I think what this discussion is pointing out is perhaps what's really primarily at issue is the social relationship between who it is that owns the labor and who it is that's doing it. Like when we think of a doctor nowadays, we think of somebody who works for a hospital, somebody who's paid a salary. But the type of distinction I think that the slides are trying to get at is it thinks about somebody who owns their own business and is a doctor, right? So in the case of the labor aristocracy, whether or not you're a high-paid tradesman like a doctor, or you're a high-paid plumber, right? That puts you in the working class because your social relationship with other people is that you are paid wage or salary, as opposed to somebody else who's an upper class that owns their own business, whether or not it's a failing Chinese business and your 13-year-old works for you, but then you're still a business owner, even though the means of production are with you and you're not even successful, right? Whether or not you're successful as a doctor at that, or you own the Chinese restaurant, or if you're a part of the Waltons, right? Your relationship to production is you buy production from other people. If you don't buy production from other people, you are de facto, or you are categorically a part of the working class. I think maybe that's the distinction I'm still making.
Well, and that's kind of why I brought this question up at the front, right? Is that there's a lot of different ways to analyze these different classes and interpret them differently, right? And this is, again, just another analysis of the different classes in the U.S. as, I and other members of the FRSO tend to see them, And it's kind of nice that there's this much discussion. I was really worried that there might not be. But yeah, ultimately, the way all of these different classes kind of relate to production can be kind of roughshod. A doctor who's making $1 million versus a doctor that...
Black doctors versus white doctors.
Yeah.
Women doctors versus male doctors.
Absolutely.
There are also other considerations. Again,
Yeah.
the trade in itself means nothing unless it's actualized by somebody in concrete.
Yeah. If anything, the trades are in there more as examples, as kind of what you might expect a person of this class character to look like. By no means is every doctor an upper class. And in fact, I think if we want to go back to a couple of the petty bourgeois slides, I think I even just repeated, I was just like, less successful doctors, less successful lawyers, as like the middle part. And then I'm sure even at the lowest part of the petty bourgeois, like are the med students who work the shit shifts at the local hospital, right? And again, would be indistinguishable from the working class economically. And so some of it is just kind of the status that certain professions carry with them, right? And it's important to know. Anybody else? Where should I push the button? Awesome. Glad we had so much discussion on that one. And then the middle section, and this is the least wordy slide on here, tend to be, the middle section of the working class tend to be highly unionized and are generally public sector workers. These would be people who work for all kinds of civil governments. I think a great example would be like the AFSCME union, AFSCME. Thank you. Who generally handle all sorts of public maintenance. I was trying to find, there's a great video for Ask Me. It's fucking hilarious. I was trying to find it and I couldn't. But as a class, they generally face a lot of economic pressure. Typically because, and we were talking about national chauvinism, how when these factories and stuff tend to move away. And so not just public sector workers, but also this would be like a lot of your rank and file, like factory workers, or at least back when America had factories for people to go make an honest living at. these would be the people that would have been more primarily affected, I think, by like factories moving overseas, right? And this might more closely resemble what we traditionally thought of as like working class back in the 50s, right? A lot of the more blue collar type union workers with more rank and file jobs who earned maybe not a lot of money, but pretty good money. Then lastly, we have the lowest part of the working class, and this is maybe the most widely defined part of the working class. This is generally made up of women, oppressed nationalities. It's very lightly unionized, if at all. Like if it is, it's probably like, I would maybe say like UPS's union is, right? People make shit money, work awful hours. Includes service sector jobs like me, light industry, low-level agricultural jobs like these would be like day laborers.
Like the working poor.
Working poor, exactly. The unemployed, generally speaking, a lot of these people in this class are very close, if not already in poverty, very close to poverty, a few paychecks away from being homeless or from like not being able to put food in the cupboard, or like one benefit away from like not being able to take care of their kids anymore, or not having like health insurance and then just dying from whatever illness they have, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're usually often also the most radicalized because they have the most to lose. And I'm sure quite a few of us fit into this category and can kind of relate to this idea that like, oh, hey, if this bill passes, I'm no longer getting health insurance and then I'm just gonna die. That'll be fun. Yeah. And then last, and actually potentially the most least, the lumpen proletariat. This is a term that gets thrown around by Marxists a lot.
What does that mean? German.
It is German. It's a fancy name for criminals, is the title I put for here before I, forgot to edit this. And they're a class that are often characterized by like drug dealing, theft, different kinds of crimes, and therefore like, they might also be a member of the working class. They might also have some working class job, but they also on the side do whatever to supplement their income. Are you?
My question is, would you include the small-time mafia ring, like crime rings, organized crime rings, but not big? Would you include them in this section?
I would say, so you're saying like specifically the mules, or just because? Well, yeah. If it's like a small time mob, I mean, it definitely lumpen proletariat. Like maybe I could have gone through and done different strategies of the lumpen proletariat as well. Like you're Tony Sopranos, then yeah, right. But generally speaking, yeah, I would say any of those like small time, even if it's like a crime, like actual like crime organization or something like that, I would still include them in this.
And how about large organized mafia?
Large organized, I would still say yes. Like even if they're making like insane bucks, right? I would still say mostly their means of production and like how they get paid is defined by like whatever criminal shit they do. Like even if they're employing people, I mean, I think there tends to be this notion that like really rich gangster types, are like the new capitalists, right, or whatever. At least there's some movies that make similar claims, right? Like they've made the American dream, aka Scarface. But I would still call them lumpen proletariat, like by definition.
Okay.
They make their money by exploiting the working class.
Right. I was just thinking of like in Colombia, like you have organized crime being run by large landlords and by mainly large landlords who are already part of the bourgeoisie. Sometimes big bourgeoisie, but I guess most of the rank and file would be something.
Well, and I suppose that's a little different, right? Like if they're a large landlord or if they own like a huge farm and then they're also selling drugs, I think you can make a case that they're kind of the landlords first, right? And that's one method they're exploiting people, and then on the side they're also the other. But it's not exactly like we're trying to overthrow lumpen proletarianism. It's just a way of classifying a part of the working class, or sometimes even the unemployed part of the working class, that also preys off the working class itself, generally speaking. I saw, was it Chris or Kyle first? Kyle?
Colombian drug lord with a lot of money and the drug lord in the US with a lot of money is that the money, the drug lord in the US, the money isn't as good, it's not as safe. A lot of times he has to launder it. You can't just walk into the street and just drug money and do whatever he wants to. Whereas I feel like if he has the support of landlords, in other words, if he's in a different position socially, his money is good and he can act more like a normal businessman. And he just happens to be running this technically illegal operation. Whereas in the US, like, the mob families have been kind of decimated and had their last meeting 15 years ago, and it's been a very long time since they've been able to buy police and stuff like that. So that even if they have a lot of money now, it's much more precarious. As I was saying that though, I was thinking about like freeway laws, and like the CIA knew exactly how much cocaine was getting used in carry. So maybe there's more commonality.
Well, and again, I mean, this sounds kind of conspiracy theorish, actually coming out of my mouth, but like again, this like often they prey off other members of the working class, right? Like they're not selling drugs to like the president, or they're like elected Senate members, like elected senators, right? It's like the dude down the street that they're selling to, and so often it means that they're making their income off of other working class men, like through exploiting some kind of relationship with them, or like by stealing their shit, right? It's kind of all the same. So, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, this is also where class analysis can get kind of sticky. So, again, the guy running a meth house technically owns the house, right? Pays his employees a salary, and is by definition doing illegal activity for purposes of income. But then you can also, what about banks that launder drug money? What about unions that are corrupt with organized crime? Right? So there's all sorts of ins and outs of just exploiting. So then the real question is what do we make of the proletarian class? Right? What's our relationship with those revolutionaries?
And I can get to that, but let's.
Okay, so I had I guess a comment and then also a question, which is where do you think that the reserve army of unemployed people would come on this? Because the reserve army of unemployed people obviously has a relationship to production in terms of driving up the cost of labor, but they are not really doing anything. But we wouldn't say, like for instance, that the traditional association movement is somebody who has a sort of criminalistic or parasitic nature. But the unemployed people, they're placed there as a functional means for them, but they're not, I mean, if they do absorb it, it's not like there's a sort of criminal nature that, like, say, for instance, somebody would need to draw on welfare.
Well, and
so that's my first question.
Okay.
And the second is, do you think that, like, kind of maybe like a really good example of the lumpen proletariat today is somebody who, like, for instance, is a Bitcoiner, or like literally like somebody like a Bitcoiner, or somebody who, like, say, for instance, makes money off of ads by commoditizing people's lives, or I mean, this has no productivity at all. It contributes nothing, and literally can only make money by exploiting other people and making, like, generally more terrible. Their experience more terrible. Like, they make money.
My first impression is like, yeah, fuck those people. So yeah, I'd probably lump them in there too. I don't know, man. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know that they're actually helping production, and I'm gonna give you that one. I'm gonna think about it. I'll come back to it. I'll think about it, and I'll get back to you. Bitcoiners are the lumpen proletariat. There we go. You heard it here first. That's maybe the most important thing that's coming out of this presentation. As for your previous question, though, the reserve army of labor, I've included in the lower strata of the working class. A lot of them like are precariously defined. Their labor is precariously defined. Like I have a lot of friends that'll go like on and off being unemployed as they like bounce between call centers for different seasons, right? I would still call them working class. Like they're very, very poor, sad to say. And unemployed often, but not like entirely unemployed, and even sometimes just for short periods of time, right, as they phase in and out, kind of the whole Reserve Army labor thing. That's what they do. So I don't know that I definitely wouldn't include the unemployed in the lumpen proletariat. And if the lumpen proletariat are also unemployed, I would still kind of separate them due to the fact that I guess they're still making money just through less than honest means. And Chris had a question I was going to get to. I don't remember what it is. Sorry.
So
it was a few back.
You brought up the idea there's a lumpen proletariat. This also goes for class analysis in general.
Right.
What follows from a class analysis? What then are the relationships we have revolutionaries built?
Oh, that's right. That is what I was going to get to.
The question is what relationships do we as revolutionaries build with these different classes?
So what relationships do we as revolutionaries build with these different classes? And that just fits so nicely into my very last slide. So glad he said it. And it's our road to revolution, right? How do we use like these different classes to overthrow monopoly capitalists? If we say monopoly capitalists are our greatest enemy, and to be fair, I kind of was biased towards that point when I started this, well then how do we use these other classes? Do we unite the working class? What role does the petty bourgeois play? What would you say your class character is, and how do you use it to unite, and stuff like that. Anybody want to tackle any of these questions first off? What should be our strategy for uniting different classes? How can we use this class analysis to understand the system as it works and use it towards our advantage? Dalek.
Okay, so bottom line, fuck the bourgeois.
There you go. Good start.
I say demand accountability from the more liberal kind of leftist petty bourgeois and oppose all others, and of course unite the working class.
Mm-hmm. And of course unite the working class. Solid finish.
See you guys tomorrow, hopefully.
We'll see y'all. Have a great night. Okay. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Ian?
Just to really kind of tack on to what he was saying, I think that for the most part you can say like you unite the working class and demand accountability, and seek alliances wherever you can. But if anywhere in that ladder, there's the group that says like, oh no, we'll stand against your guys revolutionaries, or we'll we'll take actions that are contradictory to the needs or the interests of the working class. Then at that point we need to say, okay, so regardless of your, regardless of where you are here, you're still acting in, you're still objectively aiding monopoly capital.
Well, yeah, I say we demand they be accountable by submitting to the interests of the working class.
Yeah, okay, that's basically what I'm saying.
Sounds good to me too. Anybody else?
Ultimately, I think the best way to do it would probably be to show each class the exact way that they're being exploited by the monopoly capitalists. I mean, just to see the sheer numbers and the total exasperations of how much more these capitalists have over the others. And just tell them, we're all the same, we're getting screwed by these fuckers one way or another, it doesn't matter if you're, at the bottom of the rungs or at the top. Fact of the matter is, you are being taken advantage of. What do you want to do about it, and how do we make the fuckers that are at that 1% level feel our outrage for that?
There's certainly been some movements towards that. I saw Ariel's hand first.
Yeah, well, I think that one way that we can achieve this is the main enemy, which is monopoly capitalist class, is by finding the commonality, identifying and finding, first identifying the classes and then finding the commonalities between, let's say, the multinational working class that makes up the United States society, and which is people from all over the world, who have all different sorts of points of view and ideas, and the oppressed nationalities that make up this country, which is African Americans, Native Americans, Chicano, and Puerto Rican Americans, Hawaiian Americans, and on a way to the socialist revolution, which is in my opinion the only way to turn around the existing order.
Jordan?
We also realize that certain people are very invested in class antagonism, and it's not a matter of a basic voicing of opinions, because we have a very advanced voicing of class antagonisms to separate the classes, to keep it that way. And so a very vague these are the enemies is short-sighted.
Okay, awesome. And so that kind of answers another one of these questions, what I wanted to ask. I mean, I specifically named the petty bourgeoisie, but, in general, I mean, with the exception of monopoly capitalists, do you think there's any of these other classes that have to be done away with, that have to be abolished in order for, society to be peaceful, equal? When the revolution comes, what's going to be left?
Criminals are the ones making the working class look bad.
Okay.
Having the upper class pay it.
So, with the lumpen proletariat, what would you suggest be a revolutionary goal concerning the lumpen proletariat? Would abolish them, gulags, get them all jobs, turn them into hamburger meat? Just as a...
We might get rid of the pawn shops and things like that in the lower income areas.
Okay.
That, have to do with impulsivity and creating youth behaviors that eventually lead people to
Interesting. I saw Kyle and then Greg.
So you were asking which classes we should abolish?
Well, is looking at these classes, were we to have a revolution tomorrow, or say let's make a plan, right? What classes do you think have to be gotten away with? Obviously the monopoly capitalists, and I think I made this point, obviously they've got to go. But as far as the other classes are concerned.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you're reading, this is the answer that you're trying to steer these questions, but I think the point is that we abolish all classes. We get rid of, the basis of there being different classes. We get rid of property. We also change, this wouldn't happen overnight, the nature of labor itself. So we're talking about property and truck drivers, academics, and people who shovel dirt around. And I guess in a socialist economy, you wouldn't have people who would be, we're going to stay in a room all day and draw physics formulas on the board, and then somebody else, for no reason whatsoever, is going to be outside doing dishes all day, all the time. And I see this a lot where I work. People think that I'm a smart kid because I'm in college. And they're like, oh, when are you going to get out of here? And I said, well, I kind of like it here. It's not that bad with my hands. I did that crack in school. And that's what you want, because you want to have it. But I had it, and I'm trying to get away from it. So I don't know, we're talking about reflective eyes, people, and the kind of labor we do, and kind of we'll take a revolution and have to abolish all of these distinctions. For everybody to do a little bit of everything. And that way there's no mutual thinking.
I do like that answer. Greg?
So I just wanted to say two things real quick. First off is, there's a long historical instance of a lumpen proletariat actually uniting with the big monopoly capitalists. This happened in the Paris Commune, is they got a bunch of criminals to basically kill the communists. We even saw this in Egypt. They started releasing prisoners, and not like political prisoners, but like just murderers, rapists, and they were like, okay, we're gonna release you just so you can go beat up the protesters in Tahrir Square and kill a bunch of them. And I mean, we've got to keep in mind that the lumpen proletariat doesn't exist as just like, well, how did this happen? Or even individually, like the two biggest street gangs, or families of street gangs all across the country, the people and the folks, were started to distribute drugs, heroin, cocaine in inner cities, and they just couldn't do it effectively. And this was done with the consent of like prison guards. Like the prison guards helped set it up with coordination with like the FBI, and they're like, we're gonna set up a meeting among the top gang leaders to regulate and distribute like drugs to the inner city to destroy the working class there. So I mean, one thing to keep in mind is it's like, just look at what happened with Occupy. Like the big business, the cops, they like literally got the worst possible elements of the lumpen proletariat. Those not just addicted to drugs, but who are violent, who are sexually assault people, and are like, hey, you need to go to Occupy. I mean, that happened in Occupy Salt Lake City. So we got to keep in mind that like it's not a coincidence. It's like part of a concerted plan, right? If their class analysis of like how they want to destroy the revolutionary movement, like this is something they did, and you can see it from the Black Panthers to Occupy to today. I mean, who makes up the greatest number of political police informants? It's lumpen people. The second thing is we also need to strategically think about like what class we want to be, and if it makes sense for our work. Like everybody's like, yeah, fucking working class, which is good, and like go get a job with Teamsters at UPS. Like I'm all for that. But like some work, student work, undocumented immigrant rights work, like if you just look at myself here, part of the reason that I've been able to do some of the things that I've been able to do is because I was like, I'm gonna get a job as a labor aristocrat where I can work a week and pull home $1,000 from a convention, and then I can spend the rest of my time like organizing anti-war work, organizing student works, the police brutality work we're starting. So, I mean, it's easy to just be like working class, but like we need to have like a conscious plan for like the stagehands, for the professors who are like, I'm gonna do like really time-intensive work, like undocumented workers' rights, and that means I need to be able to work like 20 hours a week and spend the rest of my time doing it. So I would just encourage people to think about like consciously a plan and where you see yourself in the revolutionary work you're doing, and just like moving forward with that.
Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if it was an accident or not, but the mountain sort of analogy that you have that underlies your presentation, I think, is actually a good way to kind of think about how it is that we should work with people.
Thank you.
Because the traditional model is, right, the mountain is inverted, and when we work forward, right, it's always what it is that rich people can do, who it is that rich people can join and buy off, so that way the rich class can get better, right? But the strategy as communists, based upon the German ideology by Marx, is going to be one where a communist, whether or not we actually have control of the government or whatever, it actually provides a plan for the entire way around. Because it's not like, oh, well, we won everything, so we get to decide how we're going to do that. That's voluntaristic and it's dangerous. Well, what we have to do is we have to figure out what at each step is going to be best to win stuff for the working class in a way that actually puts them in the position where they're on the top finally, right? And that's what it means to have, a dictatorship of the proletariat, is the movement towards that. And that's what, at least the way that I think about communism, right, is it always orients itself towards that movement. And so you might be working with other parts of the class as long as it's overall struggle. And so the whole idea of, like, say, for instance, what's the primary contradiction? What's the secondary contradiction, right? It might be the case that, you're going to be working with somebody who's your enemy. But the reason why is because by working with them, you're winning something more for the people rather than working on some other secondary contradiction. And so the whole idea of utilization of working with other classes against another class, which is something that right now the monopoly capitalists are really good at, we need to think about that strategy from a dictatorship or the proletariat perspective. And that's what I come up with.
I'm glad you liked the mountain analogy. The rest of the shit you said is awesome, but I worked really hard on this, so thank you. Will?
I'm gonna agree with what Kyle was saying earlier, that there shouldn't be any classes. I mean, specifically because if the revolution were to happen tomorrow, one of the first things that I could honestly say that I'd like to see is the current system just collapse so that no one has value over another. The rich would have no means to say they have power over anybody. So that would, that would be one of the key things I could agree with.
Adrian.
I'm thinking we need to start thinking like the rich do, basically, with their strategies of how they want to eliminate us and use it against them.
Yeah. And I think, oh God.
Think about it, like how they use drugs and all of that to get, like, to basically bring us down. Use more of that to bring them down.
Well, and kind of what I'm starting to hear being said now is kind of what I was trying to steer this towards, right? Is understanding kind of how all these different classes work and relate to each other. How can we unite with different aspects of these classes in order to overthrow the rich, right? And that's kind of what I was asking, like, if a revolution were to come, could you see any of these other classes maybe also getting the boot? So it's obvious, right? We want to kick off the monopoly capitalists, and maybe also pretty obvious we want to kick out the non-monopoly capitalists too, like these big head honchos, right? But what of the petty bourgeois? Like, you think in a revolution, like, are we still going to need to have like the really high paid doctors? Obviously they're not going to be making like buco bucks, like tons of multimillionaires, but like still making a lot of money. I mean, do you think we should get rid of them as well? Obviously some of you think there should just be like a complete dissolution of class. But like, how can we work with a lot of these different classes and understanding where they're coming from and try to build together to, kind of like Jacob said, I really liked what Jacob was saying, try to build together with these classes to try to overthrow the rich, right? And try to establish with all these different struggles what's best for like all of us, what's best for the working class, what's best for the proletariat, and work together with these different classes towards that end, and understanding how each of them work differently in order to best do that. Ariel.
I think that we need to learn to exploit the contradictions within the upper class so that we can achieve our aims and objectives, way to achieving a socialist revolution. Every revolution historically has been able to do that. I mean, pieces of the upper class have, for this reason or that, broken off and joined the revolutionary class to achieve revolution. So we as working class need to learn to exploit those differences and contradictions in the upper class.
And did I see your hand as well, Leah? Oh, awesome. Yeah.
And I want to just build up what he's saying. Who's the main target of our police brutality campaign? Chief Burbank, right? He's going down. We're gonna, target him. Make people understand him. Who was one of our main supporters in the immigrant rights struggle just 3 years ago? Chief Burbank, right? And so, by having like a class analysis and understanding our objectives, we don't run into the same problem, right? They can be like, something terrible happened to a friend of mine who's an immigrant, and I'm a rich asshole, so I'm gonna break with the class on this because of a personal sob story. We gotta be like, nope, no personal sob stories, no, you know, vacillating, no like individualism. It's like, this is our collective plan. This is who we're gonna fucking target. First step, next step, next step, next step. And we're not gonna be swayed. I mean, we don't have to be dogmatic about it, but it's like, we can never like get wrapped up into personal politics. We've always got to have a view to the wider road of revolution.
Yeah, it's easy to say down with the rich. It's harder to sit down and be like, well, how are we going to do it?
Like, I think a really good example of this is, for instance, who we would unify with on, say, for instance, issues that gear themselves towards freedom of speech, right? I mean, I know that not everybody shares this opinion, but for me, the freedom of speech is not necessarily a good thing in itself. But it may be unified, it may be a good idea to unify with people who are struggling with that. Like, say, for instance, there's a little well-known group, amongst the circle, called StopFDI.net, right? Who is it that they have rallies with? Who's that they're speaking? The ACLU. Well, the ACLU also protects Nazis as well. So, you know, you have to work with the primary contradiction first, which is we just got to stop letting them hurt our comrades. And so sometimes we work with them, and then maybe down the road we're all like, you guys should be condemned for
for defending Nazis. Yeah,
it's like, you know, so these are the ways I think actual physical examples that we are both making now, but then also kind of like wider ones that we need to think about, for instance, primary, secondary contradictions in the revolution.
Absolutely.
Well, and I mean, just one more little example, like with this recent police brutality stuff, some people have been showing up all the events have been libertarians.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, if we were talking about down with the rich or anything other than pretty much this particular subject, there's others for sure. But, you know, here we find ourselves at a unique point where our interests and, you know, where our views and the libertarians' views are aligning, and we make strategic alliances with them.
Yeah.
Whereas if we were talking about, say, you know, if we're in, like, you know, if someone was organizing a labor struggle, libertarians would not be somebody who you look to for support at all.
I thought libertarians supported the freedom of association and are as much for unions as they are for liberty.
They certainly say shit like that sometimes.
Yes,
They do say shit like that sometimes.
But why does anyone believe any shit libertarians say?
Because it's on InfoWars.
Oh.
All right. Well, all right. Anybody else have? We should watch that Ask Me video. This is connected to the. Oh, it's just YouTube. Ask me. It's no. This will wrap it up nice. I don't actually know how well you'll be able to hear it on that, but.
Just put your like neck right up with
This is headphones. Yeah. Blow up, so we're good. All right.
Yes.
Ask me. Here we go.
Do you want to introduce this video, what we're going to watch?
So the video. Okay, so yeah, I'll introduce this to the camera real fucking fast so it just doesn't look completely out of nowhere. This is a great parody video made of an Ask Me recruitment video that was made originally in the 70s, I think, like late 70s. And it's just a great way to wrap up. I was trying to find this video to include in the middle strata of the working class, because it's a great, like Ask Me is great public sector union, and then this is just a great video really doing them a lot of service in my opinion.
Hey, when you're driving to work tomorrow, instead of driving...
God damn it. What? No, it just sounds like it's coming out of the laptop and not the actual speakers. Same better.
Hey, when you're driving to work tomorrow, instead of driving around with your head up your ass, why don't you take a look around? There's a fucking union taking your money and not doing shit for you. Sure, we might pick up your fucking garbage from time to time.
What?
This crowd over here
Yeah, it's not this one.
And those guys have been fucking around behind that board's graphs for 6 months and still ain't.
We want the other one.
That one, yeah. That was a parody of a parody.
Hey, no way to work the monster. Sitting around with your finger up your ass, look around. There's a union out there called ASME, and they're busting their balls for you doing all that shit work you pay for rent. For example, we pick up your fucking garbage. We got broads out there who keep your kids from getting run over by some hard-on. We plug up the holes in the road so you don't fuck up your car. We push around a lot of little old ladies from Florida. We're out there zapping rats and roaches and making sure your kids don't drink piss from no fucking water fountains. We're fucking amalgamated federalism. Hey, I don't know what the fuck it means. All I know is we're hard-working, tax-paying people like you, and we don't take shit from nobody. You got that asshole? Ask me. The fucking union works for you.
Working class solidarity.
I was about to say, is that a parody? Because that's too fucking awesome.
Right? It's too fucking awesome.
Footage of like the sound they can like soundtrack, but it's like way over.
Yeah.
Like the original.
Yeah. Yeah. Anywho, that's how we're gonna end this presentation.
Yay.
Unions that work for fucking you. Bye.